A regular Tuesday morning. The morning sun filtered through the large windows of Manhattan Children's Hospital as Natalie Brooks adjusted her scrubs and grabbed her second cup of coffee. At 24, she had spent the last 3 years working in the pediatric emergency department, and today felt like any other busy Tuesday. The waiting room buzzed with worried parents and crying children, the familiar symphony that had become her daily soundtrack. Natalie had grown up in a small apartment in Brooklyn with her single mother, who worked 2 jobs to give her daughter a chance at a better life. Nursing school had been a dream that required scholarships, part-time jobs, and endless determination. Now, standing in this hospital, helping families through their worst moments, she knew every sacrifice had been worth it. The accident that started everything. Her colleague, Jessica, rushed over with a tablet in hand. "Natalie, we have an incoming patient. Car accident. Minor injuries but needs observation. Can you take bed 7? "Of course," Natalie replied, mentally preparing herself as she walked toward the treatment area. She pulled back the curtain and froze for just a moment. The man sitting on the bed was strikingly handsome, even with a cut above his eyebrow and dirt on his expensive-looking clothes. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and when he looked up at her, his blue eyes held a mixture of pain and something else she could not quite place. "Good morning. I am Nurse Brooks," she said, her professional demeanor kicking in as she set down her supplies. "I'm going to clean that wound and check you over. Can you tell me your name?" "Cameron," he answered, his voice deeper than she expected. Cameron West. The name meant nothing to her. She was too focused on her work to follow tech news or business magazines. To Natalie, he was just another patient who needed her care. Beyond the surface, as she gently cleaned the cut on his forehead, Cameron watched her with unusual intensity. "Will this hurt?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that surprised her. Natalie smiled warmly. "Just a little pinch, like a mosquito bite. I promise to be gentle." She worked with practiced efficiency, her touch soft despite her confident movements. "So what happened? You look like you had quite a morning." "Someone ran a red light," Cameron explained, wincing slightly as she applied antiseptic. "I swerved and hit a pole instead. The car is totaled, but I guess I was lucky." "Very lucky," Natalie agreed, examining his pupils with a small flashlight. "Any dizziness, nausea, or blurred vision?" "No, just a headache and some sore muscles." As she continued her examination, they fell into easy conversation. Cameron asked about her work, and Natalie found herself talking more openly than she usually did with patients. There was something about him that made her feel comfortable, as if they were old friends catching up rather than strangers meeting under difficult circumstances. "How long have you been a nurse?" Cameron asked, genuinely interested. 3 years here, but it feels like a lifetime," Natalie laughed. "I grew up wanting to help people. My little cousin had leukemia when I was 16, and the nurses at his hospital were like angels. They did not just take care of him, they took care of our whole family. I wanted to be that person for others." Cameron felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time someone had shared something so personal with him without wanting something in return? "Your cousin, is he okay now?" Natalie's face lit up with joy. "He is 12 now and completely healthy. He wants to be a doctor when he grows up." The truth behind the wealth. "Do you have family here in the city?" Natalie asked as she bandaged his forehead. Cameron hesitated. "My father lives in Manhattan. We run a company together, but we are not exactly close. He is always busy, always working. I think the last real conversation we had was about quarterly reports." The sadness in his voice made Natalie pause in her work. She looked directly into his eyes. "That sounds lonely." No one had ever said that to him before. People envied his life, his success, his wealth. But lonely? That was the truth he never admitted to anyone. "It is," he said quietly. "Very lonely." Natalie pulled up a stool and sat down, even though she had other patients waiting. Something told her this man needed someone to listen more than he needed medical treatment. "You know, money and success are wonderful things, but they cannot replace human connection. My mom always said that the richest people are the ones who have someone to share their life with." Cameron smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is," Natalie said proudly. She raised me by herself, working as a housekeeper and a waitress. We did not have much, but we had each other. That made us rich in the ways that mattered. A connection forms. For the next hour, Cameron found himself opening up to this nurse in ways he had never done with anyone. He told her about the pressure of running a tech empire, the expectations that came with his last name, the loneliness of never knowing if people liked him for who he was or what he had. He left out the specifics of his wealth, describing himself simply as a businessman who had inherited family responsibilities. Natalie listened without judgment, offering insights that came from a place of genuine care rather than professional obligation. She shared stories about her patients, the family she had helped, the small victories that made her job meaningful. She talked about her neighborhood in Brooklyn, the community garden she volunteered at, the elderly neighbor she checked on every morning. Cameron was fascinated. This woman had so little compared to what he had, yet she seemed infinitely happier. She gave freely of her time and energy without expecting anything in return. She found joy in simple things like helping a neighbor or watching her cousin recover. Her wealth was measured in relationships, not bank accounts. And for the first time in his life, Cameron realized he was poor in all the ways that truly mattered. "Your vitals look good," Natalie finally said, checking her watch. "But you should rest today. No driving, no work, just take it easy. Do you have someone who can pick you up?" Cameron thought about his assistant, his driver, the staff who were paid to care about his well-being. "Not really," he admitted. "Everyone I know works for me." Natalie frowned. "What about friends?" "I thought I had friends," Cameron said. "But when you have money, it is hard to know who really cares about you versus who cares about what you can do for them." Without thinking, Natalie reached out and squeezed his hand. It was a simple gesture, one she did with many patients, but the electricity that passed between them at that moment was undeniable. They both felt it, and both pulled back slightly, surprised by the intensity of the connection. The seed of something more. "Well, Cameron West," Natalie said, standing up and trying to regain her professional composure. "You are cleared to go, but promise me you will actually rest today." "I promise," Cameron said, standing as well. He did not want to leave. This small hospital room, with its fluorescent lights and sterile smell, felt more like home than his penthouse ever had, simply because she was in it. "Thank you, Natalie. You have been incredibly kind." "That is my job," she said with a smile. "No, cameron diently. Your job is to treat injuries. Kindness is something you choose to give, and you gave it freely. That is rare." As Natalie walked him to the discharge area, she found herself hoping she would see him again, which was unusual. She rarely thought about patients after they left. But there was something different about Cameron West, something that made her heart beat a little faster. Cameron paused at the exit and turned back to her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. If I came back, not as a patient but just to see you, would that be okay?" Natalie knew she should say no. Hospital policy discouraged personal relationships with patients. But when she looked into those sincere blue eyes, she found herself nodding. "I work here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Morning shifts." Cameron's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that transformed his entire appearance. "Then I will see you soon, Nurse Brooks." As he walked away, Natalie touched her chest, feeling her heart racing. She had no idea that the man she had just treated was Cameron West, founder and CEO of Tech Vision Industries, one of the youngest billionaires in America. She did not know about his $50 million penthouse or his private jet or his seat on multiple corporate boards. All she knew was that she had just met someone who made her feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world who valued genuine connection over superficial attraction. Little did she know that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined, and that the simple question he had asked, "Will this hurt?" was about to take on a meaning far deeper than either of them could have anticipated. The return. 3 days had passed since Cameron's accident, and Natalie found herself glancing at the emergency room entrance more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was silly to think he would actually come back. He was probably just being polite, caught up in a moment of vulnerability that medical emergencies often created. Yet every time the automatic doors opened, her heart skipped a beat. It was Thursday afternoon, and Natalie was finishing up with a young patient who had swallowed a penny when Jessica approached with a curious expression. "There is someone asking for you at the front desk. Says he is a friend, not a patient. Tall guy, looks like he walked out of a magazine." Natalie felt her pulse quicken. She handed the chart to Jessica and walked toward the reception area, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. When she saw Cameron standing there, holding a modest bouquet of sunflowers, she could not help but smile. "Hi," he said, looking almost nervous. "I hope this is okay. I know you are working, but I wanted to see you again." The sunflowers touched her deeply. They were not expensive roses or exotic orchids. They were simple, cheerful, and somehow perfect. "These are beautiful," she said, accepting them. "How did you know sunflowers are my favorite?" "Lucky guess," Cameron admitted with a grin. "You seem like someone who appreciates sunshine." Natalie checked her watch. "I have a break in 20 minutes. There's a coffee shop across the street. Would you like to meet me there?" "I would like that very much." Coffee and revelations. 20 minutes later, Natalie walked into the small coffee shop and found Cameron already seated at a corner table. He had ordered 2 coffees and looked genuinely happy to see her. As she sat down, she noticed how different he seemed outside the hospital setting. More relaxed, yet somehow more guarded at the same time. "So," Natalie said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup, "you actually came back. I was not sure you would." "I told you I would," Cameron replied. "I always keep my promises." He paused, studying her face. "Natalie, I need to be honest with you about something. When we met, I did not tell you everything about myself." Natalie felt a knot form in her stomach. Here it comes, she thought. He is married, or engaged, or has some complicated situation. "Okay," she said carefully. "I am listening." Cameron took a deep breath. "My full name is Cameron West. I am the founder and CEO of Tech Vision Industries. Have you heard of it?" Natalie searched her memory. The name sounded vaguely familiar, maybe from news headlines she had scrolled past. "I think so. You make software or something." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Cameron almost laughed. Most people knew exactly who he was, what he was worth, what companies he owned. Her genuine uncertainty was refreshing. "We develop artificial intelligence systems and cloud computing platforms. The company is worth about $15 billion. The number hung in the air between them. Natalie set down her coffee cup slowly, processing this information. $15 billion, she repeated. "So you're not just a businessman. You are a billionaire." "Yes," Cameron said quietly. "And I did not tell you because for the first time in years, someone was talking to me like I was just a person. Not Cameron West, the CEO, not the guy with the money, just Cameron. It felt incredible, and I was afraid if you knew, it would change everything." Natalie sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought about their conversation in the hospital, how open they had been with each other. Had it all been based on a lie? "What else did you not tell me?" "Nothing," Cameron said earnestly. "Everything I shared with you about feeling lonely, about not having real connections, about my difficult relationship with my father, all of that was completely true. The only thing I left out was the extent of my financial situation, the weight of different worlds." Natalie stared at her coffee, trying to organize her thoughts. "Cameron, I live in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn with my mother. I take the subway to work every day. I buy my clothes at thrift stores. We live in completely different universes. Does that matter?" Cameron asked, leaning forward. "Does money change the fact that we connected, that we understood each other?" "It changes everything," Natalie said, her voice rising slightly. "You probably have people who drive you everywhere, who cook your meals, who manage your life. I grocery shop with coupons. I save for months to buy a new pair of shoes. How can we possibly relate to each other?" Cameron felt frustration building. "You are doing exactly what I was afraid of. You are reducing me to my bank account. I am still the same person who sat in that hospital bed and talked to you for an hour. The same person who felt something real for the first time in years." "But you are not just that person," Natalie insisted. "You are also someone who has responsibilities, expectations, a lifestyle that I cannot even imagine. What happens when your family finds out about me? When your business partners see you with a nurse from Brooklyn? Do you really think they will accept that? The question hung heavy between them because Cameron knew she was right. His father had spent years trying to set him up with daughters of business partners, society women who understood the demands of his world. A relationship with Natalie would cause complications he had not fully considered. I do not care what they think, Cameron said. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were not entirely true. Natalie saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes and felt her heart sink. She stood up, gathering her things. I need to get back to work. Thank you for the coffee and for being honest with me, even if it was late. Natalie, please. Cameron stood as well, desperation creeping into his voice. Do not walk away because of this. Give us a chance. She looked at him, and he could see tears forming in her eyes. Cameron, I have worked too hard to get where I am. I have dignity and self-respect. I will not be someone's experiment or rebellion against family expectations. You need to figure out what you really want and whether you are brave enough to choose it, regardless of what your world thinks. The father's intervention. 2 days later, Natalie was preparing medications in the hospital pharmacy when she was called to the administrative office. She walked down the quiet hallway, wondering what this could be about. When she entered, she was surprised to find an older man in an expensive suit sitting across from the hospital administrator. Nurse Brooks, the administrator said, looking uncomfortable. This is Richard West. He would like to speak with you privately. Natalie felt ice run through her veins. Cameron's father. She recognized him from the business articles she had frantically Googled after learning Cameron's identity. Of course, she said, keeping her voice steady. Once they were alone in a small conference room, Richard West studied her with calculating eyes. He was an older version of Cameron, but where his son had warmth, this man radiated cold authority. Miss Brooks, he began, his voice smooth but firm. I am going to be direct because I believe you are an intelligent woman who appreciates honesty. My son has mentioned you. Has he? Natalie said, refusing to be intimidated. Yes. And while I am sure you are a perfectly nice young woman, you must understand that Cameron has responsibilities that go far beyond personal desires. TechVision Industries employs over 50,000 people. Our decisions affect markets, influence policy, shape the future of technology. The person who stands beside Cameron must be able to navigate that world. And you think I cannot, Natalie stated rather than asked. I think you are out of your depth, Richard said bluntly. Can you attend state dinners? Negotiate with foreign investors? Represent our family at charity galas that raise millions of dollars? Do you speak multiple languages? Do you understand international business law? Each question felt like a small cut, and Natalie felt her confidence wavering. No, she admitted quietly. I cannot do any of those things. Richard's expression softened slightly, but his message remained unchanged. My son has been groomed since birth for his position. Every relationship he has is scrutinized, analyzed, and used either for or against him. The media would tear apart a relationship between a billionaire and a nurse. They would dig into your past, your family's past, looking for any scandal or weakness. Is it the life you want? Natalie thought about her mother, who had worked so hard to give her a better life. She thought about her cousin, who looked up to her. Did she want to expose them to that kind of attention? No, she said honestly. That is not the life I want. Then we understand each other, Richard said, standing. I'm not a cruel man, Miss Brooks. I can see that you care for my son, and I believe your feelings are genuine. But caring is not enough. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we care about is to let them go. After he left, Natalie sat alone in the conference room, tears streaming down her face. She knew Richard West was right. She and Cameron came from worlds so different that bridging them would require sacrifices she was not sure either of them was ready to make. Cameron's choice. That evening, Cameron sat in his penthouse, staring at the city lights without really seeing them. His assistant had informed him of his father's visit to the hospital, and rage had burned through him. How dare his father interfere? How dare he try to control his personal life the way he controlled every board meeting? His phone rang. It was his father. We need to talk, Richard said without preamble. About how you went behind my back to intimidate Natalie? Cameron's voice was ice cold. About reality, Richard replied. Son, I know you think I am the villain here, but I'm trying to protect you. This woman, she seems nice, but she does not belong in our world. You know this. Our world, Cameron repeated bitterly. You mean the world where we have everything except genuine human connection? Where every relationship is a transaction? Where we're surrounded by people, but completely alone? That is the price of our position, Richard said firmly. Your grandfather understood it. I understand it. And eventually, you will understand it too. What if I do not want to understand it? Cameron challenged. What if I want something different? There was a long pause. Then you will have to choose, Richard said quietly. Between the life you have built and the life you think you want. Between responsibility and fantasy. But understand this, Cameron. If you choose her, you choose to walk away from everything. The company, the family legacy, all of it. Because I will not allow our reputation and our business to be damaged by a relationship that the world will see as a publicity stunt or a midlife crisis. After hanging up, Cameron sat in the darkness, his father's words echoing in his mind. Could he really walk away from everything? From the company he had spent years building? From the responsibility to 50,000 employees who depended on him? But could he live with himself if he let Natalie go? If he spent the rest of his life wondering what could have been? A midnight decision. At midnight, Natalie was awakened by a knock on her apartment door. She stumbled out of bed, confused and slightly alarmed. When she looked through the peephole, she saw Cameron standing in the hallway, still wearing his business suit from earlier. She opened the door. What are you doing here? It is midnight. I know, Cameron said, and she could see the determination in his eyes. I know my father came to see you. I know what he said, and I need you to know that he does not speak for me. Natalie wrapped her robe tighter around herself. Cameron, he is right though. We are too different. This cannot work. It can work if we want it to, Cameron insisted. Natalie, I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me. I went to the right schools, joined the right clubs, built the right company, and maintained the right image. And you know what? I have been miserable. Every single day, I wake up in a penthouse that feels like a prison, surrounded by people who do not actually know me. So I am what? Your escape plan? Natalie asked, hurt evident in her voice. No, Cameron said firmly, stepping closer. You're the first person who has made me want to be myself. The first person I have trusted enough to be vulnerable with. When I am with you, I am not Cameron West the billionaire. I am just Cameron, and that version of myself is someone I actually like. Natalie felt tears welling up. But what about your company? Your father? Your responsibilities? I've been thinking about that, Cameron said. What if there was a way to honor my responsibilities without sacrificing my happiness? What if I could build a life that includes both my work and you? Your father said I would have to choose, Natalie whispered, between you and the life I know. And what do you want? Cameron asked, taking her hands in his. Forget about my father, forget about society, forget about everything else. What does your heart want? Natalie looked into his eyes and saw the same vulnerability she had seen in the hospital, the same genuine person who had opened up to her. I want you, she admitted, but I am terrified. So am I, Cameron confessed. I'm terrified that I will mess this up, that my world will be too much for you, that my father will make good on his threats. But I am more terrified of living the rest of my life without you. The morning after, Natalie's mother, Grace, emerged from her bedroom in her bathrobe, having heard voices. She stopped short when she saw a strange man in her living room at this hour. Natalie? What is going on? Mom, Natalie said, wiping her tears. This is Cameron West. Cameron, this is my mother, Grace Brooks. Grace looked between them, noting her daughter's tears and the intensity in the young man's eyes. Would someone like to tell me what is happening? Over the next hour, sitting at the small kitchen table with tea that Grace had made, Cameron and Natalie explained everything. Grace listened without interruption, her wise eyes moving between them as they spoke. When they finished, Grace was quiet for a long moment. My daughter, she finally said, has worked incredibly hard for everything she has. She put herself through nursing school while working 2 jobs. She helps pay for her cousin's medical bills. She volunteers at the community center. She is the strongest person I know. Cameron nodded. I know. That is one of the things I admire most about her. And you," Grace turned to Cameron, "are asking her to enter a world that will judge her, scrutinize her, and possibly try to tear her down." "I know," Cameron said quietly. "And if I could spare her from that, I would. But I cannot change who I am any more than she can. What I can promise is that I will stand beside her through all of it. I will protect her as much as I am able. And I will never, ever take her for granted." Grace studied him for a long moment, then turned to her daughter. "What does your heart tell you, baby?" Natalie looked at Cameron, then at her mother. "My heart tells me that this is going to be hard. Maybe the hardest thing I have ever done. But it also tells me that love like this does not come along often, and when it does, you fight for it." The public announcement. 2 weeks later, Cameron called a press conference that would change everything. The media room at Tech Vision Industries was packed with journalists, cameras, and curious employees. Rumors had been swirling about a major announcement, with speculation ranging from a new product launch to a corporate merger. Cameron stood at the podium, looking more nervous than he had during any business presentation. Beside him, in a simple but elegant blue dress that they had picked out together, stood Natalie. Her hand trembled slightly until Cameron took it in his, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "Thank you all for coming," Cameron began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I have called this conference to make a personal announcement. For too long, I have kept my private life completely separate from my public persona. But I have realized that authenticity is more important than image. I would like to introduce you to Natalie Brooks. She is a pediatric nurse. She is from Brooklyn, and she is the woman I love." The room erupted with camera flashes and shouted questions. Natalie felt overwhelmed by the noise and attention, but Cameron's hand in hers kept her grounded. "I know many of you will have questions about how we met, about our different backgrounds, about what this means for Tech Vision," Cameron continued. "The simple answer is that Natalie has reminded me why I started this company in the first place. It was not just about profit or growth. It was about using technology to improve people's lives. Natalie does that every single day in her work, and she has inspired me to refocus on what truly matters." A reporter stood up. "Mr. West, is it true that your father opposes this relationship?" Cameron's jaw tightened. "My father and I have different views on many things, but I'm 32 years old, and I make my own decisions about my life." Another reporter called out, "Miss Brooks, how does it feel to be dating one of the richest men in America?" Natalie stepped closer to the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "It feels like dating a kind, lonely man who needed someone to see him as a person rather than a bank account. The money does not matter to me. The man does." Her honesty seemed to catch the media off guard. They were used to calculated responses to people who were carefully managed by PR teams. Natalie's genuine emotion was something they had not expected. Richard's ultimatum. That evening, Cameron received a call from his father requesting an emergency board meeting. When Cameron arrived at the conference room, he found not just his father, but several board members waiting for him with serious expressions. "Cameron," Richard began without pleasantries, "your little press conference today has created significant concern among our investors and board members." "Concern about what?" Cameron asked, though he knew exactly what was coming. One of the older board members, a man named Thomas who had worked with Cameron's grandfather, spoke up. "Concern about your judgment, about whether your personal life will affect your ability to lead this company, about the optics of our CEO dating someone so far outside our usual circles." "My personal life is exactly that," Cameron said firmly. "Personal. It has no bearing on my ability to run this company." "That is naive," Richard interjected. "Everything you do reflects on Tech Vision. The media will scrutinize this relationship. They will dig into Miss Brooks' past, her family's past. What if they find something embarrassing? What if this relationship fails publicly? The distraction alone could cost us millions in stock value." Cameron stood, placing his hands on the conference table. "Let me be very clear. I have dedicated the last 10 years of my life to this company. I have sacrificed relationships, friendships, and my own happiness to build Tech Vision into what it is today. I have never asked for anything in return except the freedom to live my life on my own terms. If that is too much to ask, then perhaps it is time for me to step down. The room fell silent. Richard's face paled. You would walk away? From everything we have built? From everything I've built, Cameron corrected. And yes, if you force me to choose between this company and my happiness, I will choose happiness. Because I have finally learned that success, without someone to share it with, is just expensive loneliness. Thomas cleared his throat. Cameron, no one is asking you to step down. We are simply expressing concern. Then express it, Cameron said, sitting back down. But understand that Natalie is not going anywhere. She is part of my life now, and anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to leave. Natalie's challenge. While Cameron was dealing with his board, Natalie was facing her own challenges at the hospital. She arrived for her shift to find several of her colleagues whispering and pointing. Some looked at her with envy, others with skepticism, and a few with outright hostility. Jessica pulled her aside in the break room. Girl, you are all over the internet. There are articles about you, your family, even your high school yearbook photo. Natalie felt sick. What were they saying? Everything, Jessica said sympathetically. Some are calling it a modern fairy tale. Others are saying you are a gold digger. There are conspiracy theories about how you plan to meet him. It is crazy. Throughout her shift, Natalie tried to focus on her patients, but she could feel the weight of her colleagues' stares. When she went to treat a young patient, the mother pulled her child away. I would prefer a different nurse, the woman said coldly. I did not want someone who is just using this job as a stepping stone to fame taking care of my son. The words stung deeply. Natalie's supervisor, a kind woman named Patricia, intervened. Mrs. Johnson, Nurse Brooks is one of our best pediatric nurses. Your son will receive excellent care. But the damage was done. For the first time since she had started working at the hospital, Natalie questioned whether she belonged there. Had becoming involved with Cameron ruined everything she had worked for? During her lunch break, she sat in the empty chapel of the hospital, tears streaming down her face. She heard the door open and looked up to see an elderly woman she recognized as Mrs. Chun, whose grandson she had treated several times. Nurse Natalie, Mrs. Chun said, sitting beside her. Why are you crying? Because everything has become so complicated, Natalie admitted. I just wanted to help people, to be a good nurse. Now everyone thinks I am something I am not. Mrs. Chun took her hand. When my grandson was very sick last year, you stayed late 3 nights in a row to sit with him because I could not afford to miss work. You bought him a toy truck with your own money to cheer him up. You held my hand when I was scared. That is who you are. Do not let anyone else tell you different. The simple kindness of this gesture reminded Natalie why she had become a nurse in the first place. Not for recognition or approval, but to help people when they needed it most. Building bridges. That weekend, Cameron took Natalie to meet someone important. They drove to a modest house in Queens, where an older woman with kind eyes answered the door. Cameron, she exclaimed, pulling him into a warm hug. It has been too long. Hi, Margaret, Cameron said, returning the embrace. I want you to meet Natalie. Natalie, this is Margaret Rivera. She was my nanny growing up, and honestly, she raised me more than my parents did. Margaret invited them in, and over tea and homemade cookies, Natalie learned about Cameron's childhood. How lonely he had been in that big house. How Margaret had taught him to cook, to appreciate simple pleasures, to see value in people regardless of their bank accounts. This boy, Margaret said, patting Cameron's hand, he has always had a good heart. His father tried to squeeze it out of him with all that business talk, but it is still there. Why did you leave? Natalie asked. Margaret's expression grew sad. Richard thought I was making Cameron too soft, too attached to the help. He let me go when Cameron was 12. I cried for weeks. Cameron squeezed Margaret's hand, but we stayed in touch. She is family to me, more than most of my blood relatives. This revelation helped Natalie understand Cameron better. He was not just a billionaire who had suddenly decided to date outside his class. He was someone who had always valued genuine connection over social status, who had maintained a relationship with his childhood nanny despite his father's disapproval. The foundation. A month after the press conference, Cameron and Natalie announced a new initiative together, the Bridge Foundation. Its mission was to provide scholarships for healthcare workers from underprivileged backgrounds and to fund programs that brought quality medical care to underserved communities. At the foundation's launch event, held not in a fancy hotel, but in the community center in Natalie's neighborhood, Cameron explained the vision. For too long, there has been a gap between those who have resources and those who need them. Natalie, and I want to build bridges across that gap. This foundation will be funded by Tech Vision, but it will be led by people who understand the communities we serve. Natalie spoke next, her voice stronger now than it had been at that first press conference. I grew up in this neighborhood. I know what it is like to worry about how to pay for school, to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet. But I also know that with support and opportunity, people from communities like this one can do extraordinary things. This foundation is about creating those opportunities. The audience, made up of community members, hospital workers, and local leaders, gave them a standing ovation. Even some of the journalists who had been skeptical about their relationship seemed moved by the genuine passion behind the initiative. Richard West, who had been invited but was not expected to attend, surprised everyone by showing up. He sat in the back row, observing his son with an unreadable expression, a father's revelation. After the event, Richard approached Cameron and Natalie. The tension was immediate and palpable. "That was quite a presentation," Richard said. "Thank you," Cameron replied cautiously. Richard turned to Natalie. "Miss Brooks, I owe you an apology. When we first met, I judged you based on your background rather than your character. That was wrong of me." Natalie was stunned. "I appreciate that, Mr. West. What changed your mind?" Cameron asked, unable to hide his surprise. Richard sighed, looking older than his years. "I did some research on your foundation idea. I spoke with Margaret, who gave me quite a lecture about how I raised you. And mostly, I watched you today. I saw how the community responded to you both. They trust you. They believe in you. That is something money cannot buy." He paused, his voice becoming softer. "Your mother, she was from a working-class family too. Did you know that, Cameron?" Cameron shook his head, shocked. "My parents disapproved," Richard continued. "They wanted me to marry someone from our social circle. But I loved your mother, and she loved me. We built something real together. Then she died when you were young, and I got lost in work and expectations and trying to control everything because I could not control the one thing that mattered. I did not want you to make the same mistakes I did." For the first time in years, Cameron saw his father not as an adversary, but as a grieving widower who had never learned how to cope with loss. "Dad," he said quietly, "I wish you had told me about Mom." "I should have," Richard admitted. "I should have told you a lot of things." He extended his hand to Natalie. "Welcome to the family, Miss Brooks. I hope you can forgive an old fool." Natalie shook his hand, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes. Family is about moving forward, not dwelling on the past. 6 months later, the hospital waiting room had become a familiar place for Cameron. He sat there now, not as a patient, but as a visitor, watching Natalie work through the window. She was comforting a young mother whose child had just come out of surgery, her hand on the woman's shoulder, her voice soothing and confident. Jessica sat down beside him with a smile. "You know, when you first showed up here, I thought you were just some rich guy having a crisis. But you really love her, don't you?" "More than I thought it was possible to love someone," Cameron admitted. "Good," Jessica said, "because she gave up a lot to be with you. Not material things, but peace, privacy, the simple life she loved." "I know," Cameron said. "That is why I'm trying to give her something in return." When Natalie's shift ended, Cameron took her hand and led her to the hospital's rooftop garden, a peaceful space that the foundation had helped renovate. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I've been thinking about what you said the night we first really talked," Cameron began. "About how you wanted to help people, how that was all you ever wanted." "I remember," Natalie said, wondering where this was going. "The foundation has been more successful than we imagined. We have funded scholarships for 20 nursing students. We have opened 3 new community health centers. And it is all because you inspired it." Cameron took a deep breath and got down on one knee, pulling out a simple but elegant ring. "Natalie Brooks, you asked me once if I was brave enough to choose happiness. You have made me brave. You have made me better. Will you marry me?" Natalie felt tears streaming down her face, But this time, they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." As they stood on that rooftop, holding each other as the city lights began to twinkle below, they both knew that their journey was far from over. There would still be challenges, still be people who questioned their relationship, still be moments when their different worlds collided. But they also knew something more important. They knew that trust, the kind of trust that comes from seeing and accepting someone completely, was the foundation of everything real. When Natalie had asked Cameron that first day if it would hurt, she had been talking about a needle. Now they both understood that love, real love, sometimes did hurt. It hurt to be vulnerable, to risk rejection, to stand up against a world that wanted to keep them apart. But it was worth it. Every moment of pain, every challenge, every sacrifice, all of it was worth the chance to be truly known and truly loved by another person. As Cameron held Natalie close, he whispered the words she had once said to him. "Trust me." And she did, completely and forever. Epilogue. 1 year later. The children's wing of the new Manhattan Community Hospital was buzzing with excitement. Patients, families, and staff had gathered for the grand opening ceremony. This hospital, funded by the Bridge Foundation and built by Grupo Vazquez, represented everything Cameron and Natalie had been working toward: quality healthcare accessible to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. Natalie, now director of pediatric nursing for the Foundation's healthcare initiatives, cut the ribbon alongside Cameron. Her mother, Grace, stood nearby with tears of pride in her eyes. Richard West stood beside her, having become a surprisingly devoted grandfather figure to Natalie's young cousins. Margaret was there too, beaming with joy at seeing her Cameron finally happy. Jessica and the other nurses from the original hospital had come to support their friend and former colleague. As the crowd applauded, Cameron pulled Natalie close and whispered in her ear, "Remember when you said some stories do not have happy endings?" Natalie smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I was wrong. Some stories have beginnings disguised as endings. And some questions," Cameron added, "change everything." They both thought back to that first day in the hospital, when a scared man had asked if something would hurt, and a compassionate nurse had promised to be gentle. Neither of them could have known then that the real question was not about physical pain, but about emotional vulnerability, about whether they had the courage to trust each other with their hearts. The answer, they had learned, was always yes. Because true love, the kind that bridges worlds and builds foundations and creates new beginnings, always starts with trust. And they had learned to trust not just each other, but themselves. To trust that they were worthy of love. To trust that different backgrounds could become shared futures. To trust that the most valuable things in life could never be bought, but only given freely. As they walked through the new hospital, greeting families and blessing each room with hope, Cameron and Natalie knew their story was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, messy, challenging, and absolutely worth every moment. The Virgin had asked the millionaire if it would hurt. The millionaire had whispered, "Trust me." And together, they had built something far more valuable than any fortune, a life filled with purpose, passion, and unconditional love.